On October 27, 1962, inside a claustrophobic cabinet room in Washington, a hidden tape recorder captured the sound of men deciding the fate of human civilization. The declassified transcripts of the Executive Committee of the National Security Council reveal a room suffocating under extreme tension. Outside those doors, the world moved steadily toward nuclear war. Inside, President John F. Kennedy listened as his top military advisors demanded immediate strategic bombing against nuclear installations in Cuba. The unsealed file paints a striking picture of crisis management stripped of public posture. For 12 days, the Cuban Missile Crisis had simmered behind closed doors, but on this particular morning, known to history as Black Saturday, diplomatic options were collapsing fast. The transcripts show a room bitterly divided between generals pressing for strategic airstrikes and civilian leaders searching frantically for a peaceful exit. Every tick of the clock narrowed the margin for error. Then came the news that threatened to destroy every fragile line of communication. An American U-2 spy plane, flying high over the Cuban countryside, was struck by a Soviet surface-to-air missile. The pilot, Major Rudolph Anderson, was killed instantly. The U-2 shootdown changed the cold strategic picture in an instant. Standard military protocol called for an immediate retaliatory strike against the enemy anti-aircraft battery, a step that would almost certainly ignite full-scale global war. The declassified minutes capture the exact moment the military brass pressed their advantage. Joint Chiefs of Staff leaders argued that the Commander-in-Chief had a firm duty to respond with overwhelming force. They insisted that failing to destroy the missile bases immediately would project weakness to Moscow. In their view, the shootdown was an unambiguous act of war that left no further room for hesitation, compromise, or diplomatic delay. President John F. Kennedy sat at the center of the storm, resisting immense pressure from his generals. Known as JFK to his staff, the president understood that firing back at Cuba would unleash an unstoppable chain reaction. The record reveals his deep skepticism toward military assurances of a quick victory. JFK recognized that once American bombs hit Cuban soil, neither Washington nor Moscow could control the escalation toward complete nuclear destruction. Within the secret ExComm sessions, the debate turned fierce as defense officials pushed to launch airstrikes within 24 hours. They argued that every hour of delay allowed Soviet technicians to make the nuclear warheads fully operational. The unsealed transcript records raw, unfiltered arguments, where voices raised and tempers frayed. Advisors warned that time had completely run out, urging the president to order American fighter jets into the sky. Instead of ordering an immediate military assault, JFK looked for a strategic gambit to pause the momentum toward war. The unsealed record details his focus on a double proposal from Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev. Moscow had publicly demanded the removal of American Jupiter missiles from Turkey in exchange for pulling Soviet nuclear weapons out of Cuba. Kennedy knew that accepting this offer publicly under threat would alienate European allies, yet ignoring it entirely meant total destruction. Beyond the quiet walls of the conference room, military forces around the globe sat on high alert. American strategic bombers orbited near Soviet borders armed with nuclear payloads, while Soviet submarine commanders lurked in Atlantic waters. The tragic loss of the U-2 pilot was a stark reminder of how close ordinary service members were to the edge of annihilation. One mistaken tactical command anywhere on Earth could set off global destruction. The record shows JFK devising a brilliant piece of diplomatic decision logic to break the dangerous deadlock. He chose to publicly answer Khrushchev's earlier, milder letter while secretly addressing the tougher demand regarding Turkey. This tactic bought precious hours, creating a brief window for confidential negotiation before military action became unavoidable. It was a calculated risk that required absolute discipline and secrecy from his inner circle of advisors. On the evening of Black Saturday, Attorney General Robert Kennedy met covertly with Soviet Ambassador Anatoly Dobrynin in Washington. The unsealed documents confirm the delicate bargain struck in that private meeting. The United States agreed to publicly pledge never to invade Cuba, while privately promising to withdraw its Jupiter missiles from Turkey at a later date. This secret concession had to remain completely hidden from the press and European partners to maintain international leverage. While these secret talks took place, the naval quarantine around Cuba remained a dangerous flashpoint. American warships enforced a strict perimeter in the ocean, intercepting Soviet vessels attempting to reach the island. Declassified maritime logs reveal multiple close calls where destroyers dropped practice depth charges on Soviet submarines equipped with nuclear torpedoes. The commanders on the water had no idea how close their leaders were to reaching a diplomatic breakthrough. Inside the Pentagon, war planners prepared for the worst while watching the clock run down. Senior officers believed the diplomatic delay was a grave strategic mistake that compromised national security. The unsealed file reveals their deep frustration with civilian oversight as military commanders continued to prepare invasion forces along the Florida coastline. Tens of thousands of soldiers waited in staging areas, ready to launch the largest amphibious assault since World War II. Across the world in Moscow, Soviet leadership faced its own unbearable pressure. Premier Khrushchev realized that the situation was slipping beyond his control following the unauthorized U-2 shootdown. Soviet intelligence reported massive American military movements, signaling an impending invasion of Cuba. Khrushchev understood that unless he accepted Kennedy's terms quickly, the crisis would explode into an unmanageable confrontation that neither nation could survive. On the morning of October 28th, a sudden radio broadcast from Radio Moscow shattered the tense silence. The Soviet government announced it would dismantle the missile bases in Cuba and return the weapons to the Soviet Union. The immediate threat of global war had passed, diffusing the most dangerous confrontation in human history. In the cabinet room, exhausted officials exhaled as the relentless psychological pressure finally broke. The ExComm minutes offer an unprecedented look into high-level crisis management under extreme stress. The declassified transcripts show that Kennedy succeeded not by overpowering his opponents, but by questioning assumptions and delaying irreversible actions. His refusal to yield to military demands during the U-2 shootdown preserved the diplomatic space necessary to secure a peaceful outcome without firing a single nuclear missile. The outcome left deep scars within the military establishment, where senior officers felt cheated of a decisive victory. General Curtis LeMay called the peaceful settlement the greatest defeat in American history, arguing that the Soviet threat should have been wiped out permanently. The archival record highlights the profound rift between military leaders who viewed war as a tactical solution and statesmen who saw it as mutual destruction. The near catastrophe of Black Saturday forced both superpowers to recognize the terrifying limits of Cold War strategy. The crisis demonstrated that existing military doctrine offered no protection against catastrophic misunderstanding. The declassified files reveal how close both nations came to disaster simply because neither side possessed a fast, reliable method to communicate directly during a rapidly evolving international emergency. To prevent another breakdown in communication, the two nations established the famous Washington-Moscow hotline in 1963. This direct teletype link allowed leaders to send encoded messages instantaneously, bypassing the slow diplomatic channels that had nearly caused nuclear war during the Cuban crisis. The structural innovation was a direct response to the terrifying communication failures recorded in the ExComm minutes during those critical hours. For decades, official government accounts presented the crisis as a resolute victory where the United States stood firm without making major concessions. It was only when the ExComm recordings and transcripts were fully unsealed that the true story emerged. The real history revealed a fragile series of secret compromises, procedural delays, and narrow escapes from unauthorized military strikes. The story of Black Saturday remains a powerful lesson in the human element of international statecraft. The transcripts show leaders struggling with incomplete information, physical exhaustion, and immense moral responsibility. The fate of millions rested not on abstract military doctrine, but on the judgment, patience, and restraint of a small group of individuals trapped inside a single room. The lessons of the 1962 crisis continue to shape modern defense strategy and diplomatic crisis control. Analysts study the ExComm transcripts today as a masterclass in managing nuclear risks during extreme international tension. The decision logic forged during those 13 days transformed how global powers approach nuclear deterrence, back-channel negotiation, and conflict prevention in the modern era. Ultimately, the unsealed record of the Cuban Missile Crisis proves that global peace was preserved not by overwhelming military force, but by quiet restraint and calculated diplomacy. Major Anderson's tragic shootdown almost pushed the world over the edge, but disciplined judgment prevailed over panic. In the quiet transcript of those historic hours, history records the precise moment when humanity stepped back from the brink of total destruction.